Good afternoon. We are going to continue with our discussion on trade policy. Uh, this is a depiction of what happens if quotas are imposed by a large country under perfect competition settings. So, quotas are like physical restrictions on goods coming in a country. The first thing that it does is that when you restrict the goods coming in, it increases the price of the imported good. Now, yesterday we had discussed the case where quotas were imposed by a small country. So, the difference between that diagram and this diagram is that the export supply curve that this country faces is upward sloping. So, again the world prices are the one where export supply is equal to the import demand, which is equivalent to saying that whenever world demand is equal to world supply, that is the equilibrium prices. So, these are the world prices. So, the free trade imports are M1, and so this country imposes quotas. It says that now we will restrict our imports. Earlier M1 imports were coming in, now only M2 are going to come in this country. It is like saying we had say 1000 units of shirts coming in, now we decide to import only 500 units or 500 units of a particular product. So, when you restrict such imports, then you have to allocate the import of this M2 among your producers. Now, this allocation is done through the licenses. So, not every producer is given a license, certain producers are given a license. So, the persons, the producers or anyone who receives this license can now import the product at PW and sell it at P star plus Q. But there is another thing which happens here is that when you restrict these imports, the foreign supplier would see it as some sort of a tax which is imposed. So, he would try to reduce the price of his exports. As a result, look at P star. P star is the price of exports of the exporter or the price of the importer, which is P star. So, P star plus Q, this is the price rise, and so the loss in consumer surplus is minus A minus B minus C minus D. The gain in producer surplus, because there is a rise of prices of the imported good, it is A. The quota rent, the difference between P star plus Q and P star is C plus E. This is the quota rent which accrues to the producers who get the license. So, the net welfare works out to be same as the case when a large country imposed tariffs, that is E minus B plus D. Now, there are four possibilities. One, this, that the net welfare is E minus B plus D, but there is always a possibility that these quota rents get lost in corruption, in rent seeking. So, you are left with only you are left with minus B minus D. Okay. So, if quota rents get lost in corruption, you would have minus A minus B minus C minus D plus A. So, it becomes minus B minus C minus D. But then when I say they get lost in corruption, it is not that the uh, the government is not aware of uh, all these things, because they are the ones who are giving the license. So they are very well aware that when you start giving license, there will be people who will approach them that you need to favor A, B, C, D, E. So then they design a rule. The rule goes like this, that your production would depend on your last year's production. Okay. If you produce more than what you did last year, then we are going to favor you, we are going to give you the license. Now what's possible when I say in rent seeking is that in the hope of increasing the production, they may not take care of the quality of the product. So just to show or put it in the books, they can show that in the books they can show that they have increased the production, or they can increase the production but they can compromise on quality. Now all these can lead to rent seeking or corruption to an extent which will be equal to C plus E. So when I say it gets lost in corruption, it's just not that it's coming in the air and it gets lost. There is a process, and through that process, which is inefficiency creeps in, and therefore you can lose this C plus E. So then what is left is minus B minus C minus D. So here one can say quotas are more pernicious than tariffs. Then the third case is when the government auctions the license. So it's a transparent process of giving the license, but when you do auction, you generate some money for your own self. So when government does auction, it generates some fees, and that fees can be equal to the quota rents. So instead of these quota rents going to the manufacturers, the quota rent now comes in the pocket of the government in the form of auction revenue. So then auction revenue is C plus E. Again the net welfare works out to be E minus B plus D. This is ambiguous like in the tariffs case, because E is the terms of trade gain, B and D are the distortions which are created in the economy. The fourth case is the case of VERs, voluntary export restraints, where the quota rents accrue to the foreign producers. The home government decides to give these quota license to the foreign governments. Okay, so the quota rents don't accrue to the home country, it accrues to the foreign country. So again this is lost. So your net welfare works out to be minus B minus C minus D. These are the four possibilities that you can have when quotas are imposed by the large country. So under the WTO regime, VER is not allowed at all. WTO is pretty clear on that we shouldn't have VERs, and also quotas now, they are increasingly saying that quotas have to be replaced by tariffs. There is one thing which one can always show, the equivalence of tariffs and quotas, and that too under perfect competition. You can always find one quota such that the price rise is the same as the case when you impose tariffs for the same level of imports. So quotas and tariffs are equivalent in that sense, because quotas also restrict imports, tariffs also restrict imports. So you can always find a quota which is equivalent to tariff, which restricts the imports in the same manner, same level, and the price rise is also the same. Now this um, uh, can happen under perfect competition, but we will see that under imperfect competition there is non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas, because if you are a monopolist and the quota is imposed, then you can exercise your option of charging higher prices than the marginal cost. So we will come back to this point, but this is the theorem which is proved uh, in International Economics 1, equivalence of tariffs and quotas under perfect competition and non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition. So let us now move on to the situation of free trade and what happens if tariffs are imposed in imperfect competition settings. Now the difference is, earlier there were large number of producers selling homogeneous product in your country and you were importing the same product from outside. That was the situation of the perfect competition setting. Now the difference is that there is only single producer of that particular product in the home country, and then there are so many suppliers of the same product, but they are all outside your country. Okay. So a monopolist in the home country and then a set of producers outside the country. Okay, so think of a situation where there is no trade. So you know how prices will be determined by the monopolist. Remember, the monopolist, his demand curve is downward sloping. It's not like a perfect competitive seller whose demand curve was horizontal. It was horizontal because he was a price taker. He was selling homogeneous product. If he charged a price greater than PW, no one will buy it from him. But situation is different here. He is the only one who is producing. So he faces a downward sloping demand curve, and then you have an MR curve, you have an upward sloping MC curve, where profit maximizing condition are whenever MC is equal to MR, this is the profit maximizing condition. So he would produce QM and sell it at PM, while a perfect competitive seller would sell it at a price where the demand equals to supply, and so he would sell QC at a price which is PC equal to the marginal cost. This is a situation of no trade. Now see what happens if there is a monopolist and he is trying to operate under conditions of free trade. So let us bring in trade now. So there is trade and it is a small country. So the export supply curve that it faces is perfectly horizontal, and that becomes his demand curve. So this is the demand curve. Now point is whether monopolist can charge a price which is PM and sell QM. This is the world prices, this is the world prices, this is the free trade imports. Now point is whether he can charge a price which is PM and sell QM quantity of product in the market. Remember, he is the only person to sell it, but then the prices which exist internationally is PW. So there are people from outside who are selling the same product at a price which is PW. He is the only producer. Now think intuitively that can he charge a price which is higher than PW? Will anyone buy his product if consumers can get the same product at a price which is PW? No. So the monopolist under free trade has to act as a perfect competitive seller he cannot charge a price which is greater than PW. So then under free trade he would produce this much wherever MC cuts MR. So this is supply, this is demand, this is the free trade imports. Okay. What happens if the tariffs are imposed? Can he then charge a price which is PM? No, even if the tariffs are imposed, the prices can go till this level where MC cuts demand here. Why can't it go beyond this? Because this is the point where imports will be entirely prohibited, zero. So even if tariffs are imposed, the prices that will prevail will be this much. Still he cannot charge a price which is PM. So what follows from this is that if you do reforms internationally, and even if you have imperfect competition or in your domestic market, theoretically the monopolist or the oligopolist or the monopolistic competitors have to act like perfect competitive producers. Does it really happen? That is an empirical question. So you can see from 91 when we initiated our economic reforms, we had monopolists. Theoretically they should have acted like a perfect competitive sellers. Whether actually that will happen or not, it is an empirical question. So you may, if you have to do an econometric work, then you have to get some measure of trade liberalization. You have to then relate it to something which probably can capture the monopolistic competition in the economy. Is there some measure that you remember which can capture the monopolistic competition? The Lerner's index. So people tend to relate Lerner index with trade liberalization, and then they see whether there is any relation with them. But the idea of economic reforms is that even if you have free trade, then it tends to reduce the measure of imperfection in the economy. Okay, so I am not going into the question when the tariffs get raised, what is the loss in consumer surplus? Again, minus A, minus B, minus C, minus D. Gain in producer surplus A, government revenue C. So the net welfare of a small country under imperfect competition again works out to be minus B plus D. How? Remember this: A, B, C, D. So loss in consumer surplus A, B, C, D, because this is the PW plus T. So loss in consumer surplus minus A, minus B, minus C, minus D. Gain in producer surplus A, government revenue C. So the net welfare, again as in the case of when we had the perfect competition settings, the loss in welfare is minus B plus T. Okay. Now when I say equivalence of tariffs and quotas under perfect competition, if I have to bring in quotas here, I can always find a quota which restricts our imports to this much, the same level of imports which are there after tariff is imposed, and you can see that it will lead to the same increase in prices. So equivalence is in terms of the increase in prices. Now, when quotas and tariffs are imposed under imperfect competition, now see what happens. Sorry, when I describe the equivalence of tariffs and quotas, you all have to see it under perfect competition, right? So now let me bring in non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition. So this diagram will see a little change. Okay, well, this is so now I'm trying to prove the non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition. Now, why there is non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition is that if you impose quotas under imperfect competition, then the producer can charge a price which is greater than marginal cost. Why? Because if some quotas are imposed, then once the quotas are imposed and the imports are restricted, you can, as a producer, you can charge a higher price than the marginal cost. Reason being that the consumer can now not undercut this producer, because the necessary imports have already taken place. Now he cannot import things at a lower price, because the quota is already fulfilled, imports have already come in. So then the monopolist can charge a higher price than the marginal cost. Now this is depicted here in this diagram. You had this demand curve, this was the local demand curve. Now once quotas are imposed and your imports get restricted, then the demand curve after quotas are imposed is this. So this country imposes quotas and you have a monopolist, it restricts imports. So now the demand curve that he faces is a new one, which is D dash, which is after quotas are imposed. With this D dash, this is the MR curve. This is the MC curve. So then MC cuts MR here, and the price that he can charge is PQ. Now the imports after quotas are the difference between this and this. So you can see this is the imports after quotas are imposed. Now the same level of imports you can have when tariffs are imposed. If tariffs are imposed, the price rises from PW to say PW plus T, and from here you can see that MC cuts this average revenue curve here. So this is the imports, but the price rise, and this imports are equal to this imports, but the price rise in case when tariffs are imposed is PW plus T, but when quotas are imposed it is PQ, much higher than when tariffs are imposed. So for the same level of imports, a country charges higher prices when quotas are imposed than a case when tariffs are imposed. And this is happening because he can charge a price which is PQ because the quotas have already been done with, right. Now he faces a new demand curve. Now no consumer can import things at a lower price than this, because quotas have already come in, imports have already come in, imports have already been restricted, right. So this shows the non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition. You can see if this was the world prices, then your free imports would have been MC cuts MR here, this is this, so this would have been your free imports. But when you start restricting imports, it can be done through tariffs, it can be done through quotas. So you can restrict imports to the same level, say this is M2, but for the same M2 there will be a higher price rise when quotas are imposed, and there will be a lower price rise when tariffs are imposed. So quotas are more pernicious than tariffs under imperfect competition settings. So under the WTO, quotas are to be abolished by each country and converted into tariffs. How do you calculate quota equivalent tariffs? You can always work out this C plus E, which is the quota rent, in proportion to the total value of the imports. That will give you one indicator of the tariff equivalent to quotas. So C plus E is quota rent. You can always find this in proportion to the value of imports. So you can always find a tariff equivalent, that will be a tariff equivalent. C plus E divided by M2 will be the proportion, that will be the tariffs, that will be the tariff equivalent to the quotas. So under perfect competition, you can see that you can restrict imports to M2, but the price rise will be the same whether you impose quotas or tariffs. You can always impose a quota where the price rise for the same level of imports will be the same. But under imperfect competition settings, a monopolist can charge a higher price, because once he knows that the imports have come in through the quotas, then he can charge a higher price, because no consumer can undercut him, because the imports have already taken place. So this shows the non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition. Now this diagram requires little bit attention. You need to spend some time looking at the diagram. So I put all this in this handout from Feenstra, both Feenstra and Taylor. And if you can look at figure 9.4, which is page 320. This is the effect of quota with home monopoly. So under free trade, the home monopolist produces at point B and charges the world price of PW. With a tariff of T, the monopolist produces at point C and charges the price PW plus T. So please look at this. This is the world prices. So the free trade imports are this much. Right now, tariffs are imposed, so the price go up. The new imports are this much. We are going to see the equivalent, the non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas. So we restrict imports to the same level, but for the same level of imports, monopolist charges higher price, while under tariffs the price rise would be less. So the monopolist would love a situation where you have imperfect competition and you find that the governments imposes quotas. So look at when the US wants to impose quotas on the cheese production. Now if there are very few sellers of cheese in US, and if government goes ahead and does imposes quotas, he would like to have it, because then he can charge a higher price, much greater than the case when the government imposes tariffs. So he would lobby to have quotas under a regime when you have imperfect competition. So under the WTO, quotas are to be abolished. VERs have to be abolished because they are more pernicious. So in the exam I can ask you a question: why are quotas more pernicious than tariffs? So you have to discuss all the 4 cases and highlight 2 cases here, one on corruption, the other on VERs, and then you have to discuss this case that under imperfect settings quotas leads to higher prices, because there is non-equivalence of tariffs and quotas under imperfect competition, right. Okay, quickly on export subsidies, because we are going to have a break after this. Export subsidies, remember, if one country imposes export subsidies, then your terms of trade fall and there are distortions which are created in the economy. So it is bad for you, it is bad for the country. Terms of trade goes down and there are artificial distortions which are created in the economy. Why? Because remember, when you give export subsidies, the price that the exporter receives is PW, the world price, plus rupees S for each unit exported. I am an exporter, I would love to receive PW plus S. Now there are other producers also who are selling the same product domestically. Now if the price PW plus S is what the exporters will are getting, every local producer would also like to step in and charge the same price. What happens? Why? Because if they charge a lower price, then there is a possibility, see the difficulty. Remember, it is a small country setting, so he can supply as much of exports, and if an exporter is getting PW plus S, he will not fall behind, he would also charge a price which is PW plus S. And then what I said yesterday is that export subsidies, whenever they are imposed, at the same time countries imposes tariffs on the products which they are exporting, because when tariffs are imposed on a product which has been exported, the domestic price goes up. Why I am saying is because the consumers can always say that the exporters are getting PW plus S, and if the local price is lower than PW plus S, they can always import the thing at a lower price. Okay. So the governments are aware of this. See, if you artificially raise the price of an export good locally, if the prices are below PW plus S, because that's possible, local producers may not like to have that much of price, but the government ensures that the local price of the export good also goes up to PW plus S, and therefore they impose tariffs on the same product on which they are exporting. So the local prices also jumps up to PW plus S. Now internationally what happens is, as soon as I start getting higher prices, I will step up my production. So if you see the world markets, the export supply curve shifts to the right. When the export supply curve shifts to the right, the world prices go down, and the world prices are nothing but the terms of trade, price of exports by price of imports. So export subsidies, what they do is, your terms of trade fall. Second, because you are artificially raising the prices, it creates distortions, production and consumption distortions. So if you work out the net welfare of this country, it is all negative, because the terms of trade fall and there are distortions which are created in the economy. What about foreigners? If there is a terms of trade loss for this country, there is a terms of trade gain for that country, but then not all of the loss in terms of trade is passed on to the foreigners. As a result, the world welfare, you will see it goes down, because there are distortions which are created in the importing country as well. So export subsidies tends to reduce net welfare of the entire world. So under the WTO, by 2013, all export subsidies, especially relating to the agricultural sector, has to be dismantled. That is one gain that we have achieved. We means the developing countries have achieved under the WTO umbrella, that the agricultural export subsidies need to be dismantled, and by next year you will see all agricultural export subsidies being dismantled, especially by the developed world. Remember, the developed world, they give lot of agricultural subsidies. In what form? One was export subsidies, another is production subsidies. But agricultural export subsidies are more pernicious theoretically, so they have to be dismantled. So under the WTO, both countries have decided to dismantle. There are certain countries which are against this type of policy, because what will happen is, the prices that you get, the prices that you receive for your export good domestically, it will come down. So there are some countries which are against this, but overall you see a situation where next year the agricultural export subsidies will be dismantled. So there are three things which have been abolished: VERs, quotas, and export subsidies. Why I am saying this? Because it looks as if from outside that WTO comes out with a rule saying this has to be dismantled, this has to be put in, this has to be put out. Whatever they say, there is a theoretical reason behind it, right? So so when we come next time, we are going to discuss the case of export subsidies. What happens if export subsidies are imposed by the small country and by the large country? Okay, thank you so much.